this very special Halloween episode of Quakerism. So, in this episode, I want to look at a couple of things. I'm going to be looking at Quakers fighting devils and demons, exorcisms, and Quakers fight against evil in the Lamb's War. Now, first off, I want to say thanks very much to Ben Wood, who suggested, well, not necessarily to me, suggested to every Quaker to be looking at whether or not, I think his line was whether or not Quakers should be more like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But my research has taken a slightly different angle, so I hope you'd forgive me. But it's still been very fascinating. So I can't really say that it's something that I've known very much about. So I have had to do quite a bit of reading about this. And I was going through trying to find articles that might help me out, looking through titles on Google search and so on. And I came across this one article with a very brazen claim that apparently Quakers only take 60 minutes to exorcise demons, which I thought was, wow, that's one, very precise, and two, rather impressive. I later found out that this was an article about Quakers, as in the American football team, in their 2006 game against Harvard, so not actually too related. Why are people who aren't Quakers keep calling themselves Quakers? It's so annoying. So I would say, in terms of early Quakerism, I wouldn't say that, having read what I've read, that exorcisms, healings, and cursings and all this sort of stuff is something that actually really comes up very much. But when you look for it, there's quite a lot of it. So we're going to have a look at two particular examples of exorcisms slash healings, and seeing what this says about Quakers of the time, and obviously just getting to talk about demons and stuff. So the first one obviously has to be from the main demon slayer himself, George Fox, and this comes from a entry that he puts in his journal as when he goes to visit a distracted woman in Nottinghamshire. Now, from what I understand, this word "distracted" comes up a lot when looking at exorcisms and Quakers of this time, and I'm starting to think it doesn't mean that this person is, distracted in the modern sense, but maybe distracted as in not, maybe suffering from a mental illness, or something that has caused the people around them to be concerned about this person. So that's what I mean by the distracted woman of Nottinghamshire, not necessarily someone who's not paying attention. And so, yeah, so here we go. So this is what he says. So he basically arrives into this place. I don't know where in Nottinghamshire it is, but she comes across this woman, and she's been like bound up because who knows what she's been up to, and he asks them to unbind her. And so they did unbind her, he said. And George, not me, George was moved to speak to her in the name of the Lord, to bid her to be quiet and still. And she was so. The Lord's power settled her mind, and she mended, and afterwards received the truth, and continued into it to her death. Exorcism. Brilliant. So you had someone who was, chained because of all the demons that were going on, and then he came, asked her to be still and quiet in the name of the Lord, and she was so. So by using Quaker worship style as a manner of purging demons, seemed to work very well, and she remained faithful until the end of her days. I mean, so he wrote his. Obviously, this was in 1649. He wasn't writing this as he was going. It's not like a day-by-day journal. He's writing this after the fact. So I suppose he could, know whether or not she stayed true and didn't get more demons later on. But, that's what he says. He also wrote, but was never unfortunately published, an entire book called The Book of Miracles, in which he stated all the miracles that either he had done personally or he had seen done by the apostles of Quakerism. And in these were, of course, things like healings. Now, whether this was in there or whether some of the other ones that I'm going to mention were in there as well, I don't know, because it was never actually published. Why was it not published in the end? We'll talk about later. But this idea that he was someone who believed that he did have the power of healing. Apparently, he even believed he had the power of healing of himself. I think he sprained his arm at one point and he healed himself. So the demon in his hand was banished as well. Excellent. The much more interesting example of exorcism slash healing that we've got going on in early Quakerism is the case of Humphrey Smith. Now, Humphrey Smith was an itinerant Quaker preacher, And he, in 1658, he entered the village of Ringwood, which is in Hampshire, which for non-English friends is kind of southwest of London. And he was asked to stay with a family who later very much regretted it. And whilst he was there was a maid by the name of Mary Hinton who was again distracted. But by the time he left, she was healed. Coincidence? I think not. Exorcism. Well, he definitely never claims that he did heal her or anything like that. But who knows, right? But strange things happened afterwards. So after that, he was arrested with two of his Quaker itinerant preacher friends, and he was in jail for over a year on very, very shaky grounds. Now, I know that obviously the law wasn't what it is now, but it was still very, very shonky. So it seems that the main reason why he was being arrested was on account of vagrancy, because he was an itinerant preacher. Apart from the fact that seemingly all three of them had relatively good alibis as to why they were going through Ringwood and where they were going from there. That none of them were actually vagrants, but yet they were in prison for a long time. It also seems that in the meanwhile, the owner of the house, who may have been, feeling a bit awkward about harboring Quakers, who were at this time seen as, at best, religious extremists, at worst, insurrectionists and revolutionaries, decided to say that instead of curing this maid, who by all accounts seemingly was cured of her illness or whatever, he said that actually no, that Quaker Humphrey Smith cursed her. Yes, and so that was why he was put into prison. Shocking. But anyway, he was later released, and records of his arrest were put in the meeting for sufferings for Hampshire retrospectively in the 1670s, but the reason for why was never stated. So did he cure her? Did he cure her? Did he curse her? He said very equivocally that he did not curse her, but he never said that he didn't cure her. So he never said that he didn't repel the evil spirits from her, but he did say that he'd never cursed her, because Quakers wouldn't curse people. I mean, come on. Who's going to believe that? Well, apparently a lot of people did, hence the jailing. But and there are quite a lot of other examples of um, early Quakers attempting effectively miracles, such as healing and raisings from the dead and things like that. And so, I suppose the question is, well, why were early Quakers doing that at all? Why talk about exorcism and miracles and things and banishing demons? Well, I think first thing, we're living in a time. Well, they were living in a time when evil spirits and demons were very much believed in, even though they were being kind of trampled down on by Protestant um, sort of rationalists. This was still quite a superstitious time. It wasn't super far away when Shakespeare was writing Macbeth. James I was writing Demonologia. The Salem witch trials obviously took place later on in the 1690s. So it's not as far-fetched as if Quakers nowadays came out of meetings and started, trying to heal people and banish evil spirits. And it's obviously very spiritual. It's very biblical, and this is where I think early Quakers were more going from, was that they thought they were, or certain Quakers certainly thought that they were new apostles, bringing the church back into the primitive Christianity of the Age of Apostles. And the Age of Apostles had healings and had exorcisms, and so in order to show that they are returning to that, there had to be signs of these kinds of miracles going on. Plus, it's just classic early Quaker behavior, to be honest. Anything that sort of ruffles feathers and shows that they are starting a new church or going back to the original church is definitely going to be something that they're game for. Plus, all this sort of mystical element. I think early Quakers would have been all over that kind of stuff. But that being said, they never went too far with that. although they couldn't stop more extreme expressions of um, sanctification and apostolic nature, the apostolic nature of early Quakerism, it was the idea was that you were meant to come to meeting with these ideas. If you think that you could heal people, go to meeting and talk about that, and maybe wrestle some of those feelings out a little bit. It was also uh, part of, in terms of Quakers turning away from that, was very much part of James, in reaction to James Naylor's blasphemy trial, where Quakers were very much in the spotlight of being blasphemous. And so anything that could potentially be blasphemy, like talking about exorcism, which was illegal in England as of 1604, uh, and was considered like popish and Catholic, and so they wanted to get they didn't want anything to do with that. So that might be another reason why they pushed back or reeled back from that kind of talk and language. And also, it was actually how uh, anti-Quakers talked about Quakers. That was one of the main things they said to try and detract people from joining Quakers, was by saying that they were uh, devil worshippers, or that they were in league with demons, and they listed loads of apparent healings and exorcisms that Quakers are claiming to have done, to the extent that George Fox actually wrote a tract against magic and things, to try and say, no, we are not doing magic, we are not doing exorcisms. And even though there's certainly evidence to the contrary. In fact, it seems also they love, anti-Quakers like doing it both ways. They like saying, "Oh, look at them! They're doing exorcisms and magical stuff, and oh, isn't that awful?" But they also loved it when apparently Quakers were doing exorcisms and miracles and they didn't work. They loved that too. So it seems like we can't win either way. Either we can't do we're doing all these miracles and that's bad, or we can't even do a miracle and that's rubbish. One of my most favourite attempts to discredit Quakers by saying that they were doing exorcisms was during the blasphemy trial of James Naylor, when a woman called Dorcas Erpry, which pretty great name, claimed that during their joint um, sequester in Exeter prison, he raised her from the dead. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but I mean, he denied that he did, and probably fair enough. But that would have been pretty cool, but also and a bit spooky. But seems apparently he didn't do that. And there seems to be a kind of division between spiritual healing and with its physical uh, side as well, versus cursing. Now, I think obviously cursing looks more evil, right? And this was with Humphrey Smith's case. This was what he was trying to show that he wasn't doing. He definitely wasn't cursing the woman. He may have healed her. He doesn't say. He may have healed her, but he certainly didn't curse her, because that would be really bad. Bad because obviously it's sort of wishing ill on other people, but also because cursing was particularly linked with other more radical religious groups at the time, like the Muggletonians, who, apparently the leaders of the Muggletonians bragged about cursing over 1,000 people, and would rather do that than being given 40 shillings. So don't want to be necessarily linked with those through saying that you do cursing, but at the same time, maybe not wanting to say precisely that you do healing either, because that seemingly is also bad. Even though also it isn't. Depends who's doing it, because obviously the king is perfectly acceptable in that time for the king to be touching people with scrofula in order to heal them. So the idea of um, healers and healing wasn't completely irreligious and blasphemous if the king can do it. But when lowly Quaker preachers do it and help poor maids out, then apparently that's terrible. So I think the evidence on whether or not there was any demon banishing going on in early Quakerism by the early Quakers seems to be, a bit dubious. But hey, it could be there, and I kind of like it. But certainly one thing that Quakers were doing, and I think Quakers still are doing, are fighting the evils and the demons of this world spiritually, not through, you know, actually with, stakes through the heart and cool vampire slaying gear, but through spiritual warfare, which is way cooler. So in Quaker speak, I'm not sure if it's a Quaker term actually, but in Quaker speak, this is known as the Lamb's War, which kind of signifies this alternative to war where it's not about actual weapons and hurting and killing people. It's more about um, defeating evil, spiritual evil. So the reason why it's called the Lamb's War, again, I'm not 100% certain on this term, but I was reading an article on Mark Ross's blog where he was talking about why people should read the Book of Revelation. And he says because it talks a lot about the slaughtered lamb, relating obviously to Jesus and his crucifixion, as a sign of how we should act as humans, not trying to, you know, be on top as a conqueror, but rather be meek and like a lamb. On this, probably one of the most explicit tracts on the Quakers' view on their fight against evil and the demonic would be by James Naylor, who we mentioned already. And this is in his tract, the Lamb's War Against the Sin of Man. And so I'm just going to read a couple of passages out because I think, one, it sounds like we're slaying demons and stuff, and that sounds cool. But also it shows that actually, no, this isn't literal stakes and holy water. This is a spiritual fight. So first he talks about what the manner of his war is, what Jesus is trying to do, what's his aim in this war. And effectively he says that his aim is to show men and women who the enemy is. So it goes, he gives his light into their hearts, even of man and of woman, whereby he lets all see who will mind it, what he is displeased with, he being Jesus, and what is with him and what is against him, what he owns and what he disowns, so that all may know what is for destruction, to come out of it, lest they be destroyed with it. So that's who we're fighting. We're fighting by listening to Jesus, and by following Jesus, we'll find out who we're meant to be spiritually fighting, those demons and their devils. And he goes on to explain exactly what those demons and what those devils are when he talks about who we as Quakers are to war against spiritually war against. Whatever is not of God, whatever the eye which loves the world lusts after, whatever the flesh takes delight in, and whatever stands in respect of persons, as saith the Scripture, the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, these are not of God, and whatever the God of this world hath begot in men's hearts to practice or to plead for, which God did not place there, all this the Lamb and his followers war against. Excellent. We know who we're fighting now. We know what these devils are. Perfect. Well, next thing we want to know, fine, you're not going to give us vampire steaks and cool gizmos. What are we going to fight with then, James Naylor? Tell us, please, so we know how we can fight. And this bit's probably the most famous. So he says, and as they war not against men's persons, so their weapons are not carnal, nor hurtful to any of the creation. So he carries on by saying he puts spiritual weapons into their hearts and hands. Their armor is the light, their sword, the Spirit, and the Father and the Son. Oh, nice bit of Trinitarianism there in James Naylor. Their shield is faith and patience. Their paths are prepared with the gospel of peace and goodwill towards all the creation of God. Their breastplate is righteousness and holiness to God. And thus the Lamb in them, and they in him, go out in judgment and righteousness to make war with his enemies, conquering and to conquer, not as the prince of this world in his subjects, with whips and prisons, tortures and torments on the bodies of creatures, to kill and destroy men's lives who are deceived and so become his enemies. But he goes forth in the power of the Spirit and the word of truth, to pass judgment upon the head of the serpent, which doth deceive and bewitch the world. So therefore, this Halloween, no, we're not probably going to be slaying any demons or exorcising any evil spirits, but we are spiritually at war against all that which is not of God. So that which is to do with the sins of the world, which we've talked about in other videos before. We are in spiritual warfare against that, and we've been, if we listen to the inner light, we and we delve into that relationship, we will be given the weapons with which to fight it, not only to defend ourselves, but also to defend humanity and creation. So I wish you a very happy or spooky Halloween, or whatever kind of Halloween you're going for this year. And remember, you don't need a costume because, according to James Naylor, you've already got a fantastic costume which has been given to you by the Holy Spirit. So excellent.
Thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, please do click on the thumbs up and the subscribe button to get more videos about Quakerism in the UK today. It really does help, and thanks once again.